Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me? Let's see.
It shows this live event will begin.
Okay. Yep. Okay, good. Thank God. This is my first attempt at live streaming, and anything other than Zoom for work. And I'm so against using Zoom for like fun stuff because I have to use it every day. So I figured YouTube would be simpler, more, what do you call it? Accessible, since you can just pop on. But yeah, so we'll see. Thank God it's working. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my very impromptu, unprofessional launch party for my book, Leather and Lace, book 1 of the Southern Gothic series. So today, I'm not sure how long this is going to go, of the Southern Gothic series. So today, I'm not sure how long this is going to go, hopefully about an hour. Just going to do some Q&A and a live reading of, I'm probably going to limit it to the first 2 chapters of the book because we don't want to be here all day long unless you would like me to read more, in which case that's totally fine. Yeah, feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat. I will have it on slow mode so I can read it, hopefully, and keep up with it. I don't have a moderator because I'm not expecting that many people here. No offense to you guys or to myself, but it's a self-published book and I don't have a marketing team, so I don't anticipate having to have a moderator or having like thousands of people coming to tell me that my book sucks. I mean, that could still happen, you don't know. So like I said, chat's open. I'll keep up with it. So but thank you so much for coming and for supporting the book. It sounds cheesy, but like every review helps, every retweet helps, every share on Instagram helps. So I appreciate it. And everyone's been so kind and thoughtful, especially during this week, because I had the brilliant idea of like, I'm gonna go ahead and launch the book like right after Valentine's Day. It's like we're past the election in America, whatever, not going to get into that. And then we're past the holiday season and it's right around Valentine's Day. And I thought it dovetailed really nicely into the anniversary of the first short story that obviously that Leather and Lace is based on, and the novel adapts and elaborates on, came out in, I believe, the February 5th of 2018. So I thought, I was like, oh, it's nice. It dovetails in nicely. Oh, yes, the trade paperback is here. My stage hand just brought it to me. Yeah, this was first published in February 2018. And it's available in paperback and I think on Kindle at most major retailers. This is actually the Kino Kindi. I can't pronounce this. Anyway, so this was this was actually the alternative cover that was for a bookstore in New York, because it was they sell Japanese books and manga and art and everything, and they actually the original Twisted Romance run did really well in Japan, so this bookstore wanted their own little special cover. So that's exciting. So far, the ebook sales for Leather and Lace have done pretty good in Japan too, which I don't know what that means exactly, except that there's a certain taste. Maybe Dorian plays well to Japanese audiences. I don't know. That'd be fun. But I thought it would be fun to have released the book right around Valentine's Day. After the anniversary of Twisted Romance coming out and everything, but then like literally during this week, during launch week, my home state of Texas and most of the American continent was snowed in and obliterated by a massive storm. So it's been weird. My family's fine. My friends back home in Texas are fine. They either didn't lose power or got power back fairly fast, and no one lost, at least no one I knew personally lost water and all that, lost water access. So it's been an emotional roller coaster of a week. But so it is what it is. Timing doesn't always work out in your favor, but that's why I appreciate everyone being so kind about the book coming out and being patient with me, because it has been an emotional roller coaster. But yeah, so like I said, this is just kind of an informal launch. Nothing crazy. Like I said, feel free to drop any comments in the chat. I do have some questions on my phone, which I'll read. I'll take my giant clicky clacky phone charms off so you don't have to listen to that constantly. But again, if you have anything you want to ask me, drop it in there. I'll answer it. I'm not scared. Let's see. I have quite a few here. I'm going to go ahead and assume that everyone's read the book, or at least has approximate knowledge of the short stories. So I'll try not to spoil anything for those who don't, although I would be curious why you're at a launch party if you haven't read the book yet, but I'll try not to spoil the ending too much, hopefully. Let's start off with something simple. How did these characters come to be? So obviously Dorian and Cash were first created for the Twisted Romance prose and comics anthology from Image Comics. We started working on the project in 2017, and it was a huge, big collaboration. The initial run was 4 issues. It was a mini series, and it was collected in trade paperback later on that year. And my initial, I wanted to write a vampire centric monster hunting story since I think about 2015, if I'm being honest. I've always really liked monster hunting stories, especially stuff obviously there's a lot of parallels with monster hunting and westerns. You have Supernatural, you have the Granddaddy, Vampire Hunter D, and then some of the more pulpier stuff John Carpenter's Vampires, that kind of thing. I've always really loved monster hunting stories, and the idea of this sort of old west lawlessness of these people who were just on the road hunting monsters, doing what needs to be done, whatever. It's very American exceptionalism, Manifest Destiny, but there's just something nugget in there that I thought was fascinating, and I wanted to I really wanted to write a story about again sort of in the vein of Vampire Hunter D, of a vampire character who hunts monsters and sort of operates in this world of monsters and monster hunting. But I really liked the idea of subverting expectations of what we sort of assume about vampires and what we enjoy about vampires, in the popular, consciousness. Vampires are always a metaphor for the upper class. They're always the secret world order. They own everything. There's always a big vampire conspiracy, and that kind of bores me. Having vampires just be this beautiful, perfect, wealthy, problem-free group of people who run everything, but are also brooding and sad about not having humanity. I don't know. I know that there's a lot of inherent contradictions, and you have a lot of vampires who stand for a lot of different things. Like Carmilla, or religious puritanical fears of the other, and lesbians stealing your women and whatever, there's a lot of that. But in most movies, we see vampires as wealthy, and I'm that's kind of boring. And I like the idea of kind of subverting that and playing around with vampires who are just really underwhelming at what they do. The unlucky, it's the tagline for Dorian is he's an unlucky vampire, because he's not very good at much of anything. He's not very adept. He's good at customer service because that's his lot in life. Lower class, comes from a broken home. and has had to work very unsavory customer service jobs in very abusive situations to make do because, while there are vampires in his world that are upper class and all that, like he's at the bottom of like the social ladder. So I wanted to have a little fun with the idea of a more relatable vampire, and like just a vampire kind of like hooks up with a monster hunter to get by, because Dorian, gentle vampire sweetheart. Yes, it's true. He is a gentle vampire sweetheart. He's just got a mouth on him. It's whatever. It's fine. So yeah, the initial idea just sort of came from that. Just like a love of monster hunting stories, but like a desire to subvert expectations. And Dorian kind of, I came up again, obviously I spent a lot of time talking about him, but came up with the idea for Dorian pretty early on. And like I said 2015, and then it sort of like hung around in the background of other things I was working on. And Cash sort of came in later because, and obviously if you've read the book or the short stories up until this point, like, yeah, there's very strong parallels to like Dean Winchester and like Cash. Because, when we think of monster, at least most people that I know today, when we think of monster hunters, we think of Supernatural. The show was on for 15 seasons. There were books, the supplemental books published for it. There was the anime spin-off, which was kind of weird. They tried, I think they tried a spin-off with like some women characters. I don't think that, Wayward Daughter or something like that. I don't think that went anywhere. But when we think of monster hunters, we think of like the CW show, honestly. So that Cash took a little while longer to tease out to sort of figure out exactly what I wanted to do with him, but Dorian was pretty crystal clear. I wanted to tell the story of a downtrodden, broke, unenthused vampire, who sort of gets sucked into the world of monster hunting to make ends meet, and sort of exploring the world of monster hunting from that perspective, not the perspective of, traditionally monster hunting stories. It's like there's a catalyst, which is like someone's tragic backstory. My wife died, my mother died, Supernatural, obviously, or, my family was killed by vampires, they raided my town, blah, blah, blah. So, it's usually it's like a vigilante justice thing. Monsters did X, so I will do Y to all monsters forever. And I wanted to sort of explore that idea a little more from just the, economic desperation side. Like, all right, if I have no other skills, and this is an easy job to fall into, it's like easy labor. It's just as long as you survive, you get by, you get paid. And sort of explore the idea from like, again, more like a lower class working poor perspective. Like, I did this because my dad did it. I have no other skills. I wasn't going to college. I became a monster hunter. So I wanted to sort of explore it more from that. But there's a popular tabletop RPG game by Olivia Hill and various other artists called I Hunt that covers a lot of the same stuff. People keep recommending it to me. I'm told that it has like almost all the same themes of like hunting is like a gig economy thing, like, being an Uber driver or, doing DoorDash, but it's monster hunting, which I know Olivia on Twitter. It seems really interesting. I don't do tabletop RPG stuff. So, I've been recommended it many times. So if you like this book, you might check that out. They do a lot of stuff and seem to cover a lot of ground. And it all looks really interesting. Gus says, glad to see poor vampires are always well-to-do. Yeah. Yeah. And with says, glad to see poor vampires are always well-to-do. Yeah. Yeah. And with, and not to be like too, I guess, but I guess topical, but there is a certain level of like conspiratorial thinking with vampires as like the secret cabal of people who own the world. Like I'm not trying to draw parallels like QAnon, but like that has like when you go to like the imagery of Dracula historically as like a very anti-Semitic character and to stand in for like British fears of like the other and Jewish people and all that, like when you see that sort of like continued theme of like vampires secretly own everything, like Yeah, I don't know. And it doesn't feel good. It feels like I'm contributing to something that I do not wish to. Certain, conspiratorial thinking, let's say. But yeah, that's ultimately where the sort of germ of the idea came from. And I will not lie, it became much more solidified when I was playing the dating game Dream Daddy, because I joke all the time about Dorian being Goth Dad and then Cash being Knife Dad, because like I was Damien and Robert were like my favorite characters in that game, and there was some visual inspiration. Like, I'm not gonna lie. After I played that, it was like I really absolutely. This was like in early 2017 or maybe like late 2016. I don't remember when that came out specifically, but I remember like I have to do this now. Like, this has given me like such a crystalline vision of like what I want to do with these characters. I need to do it, and I had the opportunity to explore the characters and the world and just the general ideas with Twisted Romance initially, because Alex DeCampi, who organized the project and wrote, I think, most of the comics in it that weren't created by other comic artists, approached me and was like, hey, write me a story. So I was like, yes, I have exactly one story in mind. Sort of pop culture-y understanding of vampires, and a lifetime love of monster hunting stories, and then Dream Daddy. Just gonna be honest, that was what happened. That's how this book came to be. Okay, so I have like all of these in here saved. I should have separated them out, but I'm not very smart, as you can tell. How was the process of writing such and such amount of short stories and flash fiction before writing the novel? And how was the process of writing that and then going to the book, and how these characters have changed? Okay. That's interesting, because I initially wrote the short story, and then I ended up writing like, I'm going to say 30 to 40. I honestly lost count of how many short stories I ended up writing about these two characters and their world and the rest of like their friends and family and stuff. And additional characters, because I wrote a bunch of stuff to sort of just sort out the world. I really wasn't sure if I was going to write like a novel or a novella. So I just wrote a ton of short stories. I put them all on Patreon, which I just closed this month, rest in peace. So yeah, initially really, really are, because like I the original short story was only like 6,000 words. It was pretty short as far as like, publishable short stories go. And it was just sort of like a brief overview of like my ideas for like what a monster hunting world could be. And so I ended up using the bulk of this stuff. But it's hard to keep count, because I also did like a ton of like AU alternate universe stuff that some of my patrons requested, and then a lot of people would like send me little requests, and I would write stuff too. So between the prompts that I wrote for, and then people actually like requesting stories, like I overarching world that I was building, but also like the timeline of the characters' lives, and how this is going to sound so weird, but like there's so much stuff that's just sort of like on in the background that impacts the characters' lives directly in ways that even they don't know about. And like in the vampire world ends up impacting like Cash's life, because his family were originally vampire hunters from Mexico, and like say political instability and power vacuums resulting from political drama in the vampire world impacted like the lives of vampires who were cut off from, let's say, more civilized, I'm using that term extremely loosely here, forms of procuring food, because in this universe, vampires don't attack people. They only attack people if they're like, sorry, I just realized my mic was in the corner. Anyway, they don't attack people. It's like, they mostly subsist on like animal blood and meat because they're obligate carnivores. They don't eat they don't eat plants and vegetables and stuff. But so vampires losing their access to a steady food supply drives them into desperation, which drives them to attack people, which gives vampire hunters a job to do. And if things sort of balance out and the power vacuum is filled and someone comes in and reestablishes like the food stock, let's say, vampire hunters no longer have a job really. So then they move out to other places. That's what happened with Cash's family. You know, they started off as vampire hunters in Mexico. His family just had to kind of pick up and move up to the United States. That's how his family ends up in Texas. You know, so there's a lot of like, that's something that I had to like work through short stories and that sort of overall timeline of events and how these sort of things intersect, you know. And I probably would have none of that would have like occurred to me if I hadn't written the 30 to 40, let's say, short stories to work out how like and their sort of like goals as characters, because what I initially envisioned for their goals as individuals and then like overall like relationship goals back from the Twisted Romance days has changed quite a bit. So yeah, it was I would say it's an overall net good to spend so much time, about 2 years writing the short stories and responding to like reader prompts basically and being like, but have you considered this? And it's, I thought that was very beneficial. And there's a lot of lead time to help me work out all of those ideas and nail down what I really wanted, like for the overall themes of the story and for like the characters' like thematic arcs. So I would say that it was a good experience. I probably wrote way more than I needed to. Followed me from like Patreon to now know that I ended up incorporating a lot of the original short stories that I wrote. I retooled them as flashbacks in the book. So a lot of that like character, what's the word I'm thinking of? Sort of like character. So yeah, that was overall kind of the process. I think it was good and it was productive. So, and I ended up collecting a lot of. Jesse asks, I did like the aspect of eating meat as a food supply. Does it always have to be raw? How cooked can it be before it stops being of any value to them? Interesting question. So that varies sort of, like I said before, fairly low on like the social ladder when it comes to monsters, because the whole, especially like one of the big, just gently moving my laptop camera. So you have shapeshifters who can assume human identities and blend into human life and be totally fine as long as they don't step out of line or attack humans or eat humans or whatever. And then you have vampires who cannot shapeshift and are very more animalistic looking, so then Dracula, and that was sort of what I was going for. They're a little more beastly. So my train of thought. So there aren't very many vampires compared to shapeshifters who've adapted wonderfully and are thriving in society, and vampires are not. So their society is very small comparatively. And so there's different vampires in different regions of the world, and they all have different regional cultures, and that extends to food. Some of them prefer meat basically raw. Some of them do cook it, but like their idea of spice is very different than ours. It can be cooked, but yeah, once you start cooking out the blood and all that stuff, like it does start to lose its value. So I mean, I think like a raw steak, or not raw, so like a rare steak, like a medium rare burger, like it has to be pretty raw, otherwise they lose their appetite for it. So like I said, some of it is like personal taste, some of it's like regional, but like if you hand Dorian a well done steak, he's going to be like, I can't eat this. This isn't even fit to feed my dog. So, so yeah, it is. It can be raw. They tend to prefer raw meat because, like I said, they're obligate carnivores. They don't eat vegetables because it makes their tummies hurt. Let's just be honest. Some people asked me if it was the same as Tokyo Ghoul, because because in that they are carnivores and then they drink coffee and stuff. So I don't know. To sort of like, I guess, play off that question, because I do get that quite a bit. Is it like Tokyo Ghoul? No, yes and no, because like, yes, they do eat meat and other things. And they can sort of kind of eat vegetables and drink coffee. Kind of. It's just a matter of like their bodies just really aren't built to process that kind of material. So it gives them a stomach ache. They're not like allergic to it. It's not like when you give a dog chocolate and you have to take him to the vet immediately. You don't have to take Dorian to the vet. Not yet anyway. But it's just like there's a certain threshold, like ice cream, he's going to go for it even if he gives himself a stomach ache. Yeah, there is a certain threshold where they like just can't consume it and it just makes him ill. So he's always turned like riding up to that line of food poisoning. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that. Yeah, a lot of people have asked about like how the burger though. All right, so thank you for that question. I have quite a few more, so I'll do this until everyone gets bored. So the primary, for like marketing purposes, the primary genres are paranormal, group that exists, and we all know it, and it's an integrated society or whatever. It's more like cryptids as opposed to like, what's the word I'm thinking of? As like an integrated sort of society, because monsters are all sort of like, you had werewolves here, you had vampires here, you had, Big Feet, Mothman, they were all sort of like, moth people, sorry. They were all, sort of living in their own little cloistered communities, like off in the wild and different parts of the world. And sort of like living in their own little isolated communities in different parts of the world. And where was I going with this? I'm like reading questions and then going off on tangents. But so they never really had like integrated societies amongst each other. They all just sort of like lived around each other and then sort of lived around humans. And it was only when humans began encroaching, on nature, let's say, there's a very like ecological bend to this whole narrative. If you've read any of my other stuff, that's due to industrialization and colonialism and just humanity encroaching on monster territory. Let's say monsters had to make the choice of being folded into human society at living by humanity's laws, or risk being hunted to extinction. And the whole thing is that like monsters who are able to adapt and shapeshift have done very well. Those who can't, which the term in the world is called being deadlocked, like you are locked in your form and cannot change. Those who cannot change, which include like your more, sort of cryptidy sort of monsters, like, your Big Feet and like mermaids and vampires, like their whole deal is that they either have to assimilate as much as possible and like sort of hide in plain sight or flee into the woods. So you have like Big Feet who flee into the woods, and you have vampires who, live in the cities and towns and very cloistered communities. So communities and have their own individual histories and cultures, which vary wildly depending on, where you are in the world. So like a werewolf in Bangladesh is not going to be the same as a werewolf in like Mexico. Like they're just totally different, they have shared histories and fantasy world. In that respect, pretty cut and dry. Humans own everything. Monsters are allowed. Humans who know of the existence of monsters and are employed by various local governments and such to deal with monsters who step out of line, because the whole thing is that monsters aren't allowed due process. Because the government wants to exploit them, the same way that like we pay taxes. If a vampire is allowed to live in a human society, they're expected to pay taxes. So that kind of thing. Like there's a certain level that humanity is like, well, if we're going to let them in our society, and that includes economic exploitation. In terms of like unfair taxes. I'm not a libertarian, I swear. It's just that After watching all the stuff in Texas this week, it's like everyone's power bill is going to go up because surge demand. That's the kind of crap that monsters have to deal with too. Live in the. Sorry, I keep hitting my mic. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm always in the frame. And like I said, hunters just sort of like exist to keep monsters in line because they're not allowed due process. You cannot have a werewolf in jail. That's gonna. The jig is up. If you have a werewolf for trial, people are going to find out. A vampire trial, people are going to find out. It would behoove the American government and the world government, and I say American first because Devereaux is in Louisiana, which is in America, to just let monsters be monsters quietly, live their lives, take money where they can, and then just let them, as long as they play by the rules, they get to live. And so, like, as there are, especially with like the more like LGBT or like paranormal romance, which again have their own very specific sort of things, and likes to cook and keep a home, like he's very he has a lot of feelings in his little body. And you have Dorian, who looks very, his whole thing is that he's very feminine and he's non-binary. He's not a boy. I call him a boy, but vampires don't really have gender the same way that we do. They're basically all non-binary by default because they don't have binary gender, which I don't touch on a great deal in the book because like that's one of those things that like Dorian just exists. He occupies a world where that's just how things are, and he doesn't comment on it because there's no reason to. Cash isn't going to go, oh my god, vampires. He knows. He knows enough about vampires to know. So it never comes up. But there's a lot of stuff that's like very baked into paranormal romance that I kind of wanted to subvert. And not all romance readers appreciate that romance sort of storyline because I really wanted to have it be like, no, they started off as friends first. They have a partner is only just, making fun of each other and bickering. There's no actual animosity to it. And, and then I like the idea of like romance. So there's definitely not going to be a big moonlighting thing in the rest of the series because they're already together. So yeah, like I said, the tropes that I do utilize, I try to subvert a little bit. And again, there's nothing wrong with romance. Like I buy romance manga and I enjoy it. I buy the occasional like, cute cottagey sort of romance here and there. And like I do enjoy the genre. It's just there's a lot, especially like in the LGBT section and side of things that like doesn't resonate with me. And I tried to subvert that as much as possible just because it's like, write the stories that you want to see in the world basically. So yeah, it's not super tropey that like I totally understand a lot of romance readers really, really like, and I do enjoy some tropey romance myself. But I try to subvert some of that stuff that I just doesn't resonate with me or doesn't work for me, or I feel like doesn't create the emotional experience, I guess, of like having a couple that like you really, really root for because you just love them so much as characters and you buy into what they see in each other. And I don't often get that with a lot of like mainstream stuff that I pick up. So yeah. Like I said, paranormal romance and urban fantasy. How successful depends on what you're into, I guess. But yeah, I like I said, I feel like it's a very bog standard sort of urban fantasy story. Whether or not it's a good paranormal romance really depends on what you're into, I think. So that's my non-committal response to that question. But thank you for asking. Oh, hello. Yes. J.M. Brett says I actually made it. Yes. I'm going to do this until people get bored. I realize that it's like 40 minutes in and I was only going to go an hour, but whatever. We're going to keep going. I have no time is irrelevant. It's Saturday. So let's read through this. It's actually been super wonderful. Because having people who already are familiar with the characters and their world and like just the themes and the stories that I am working on telling and have told and will continue to tell hopefully through the rest of the series has been super beneficial. Like I said, I initially started releasing short stories on Patreon after Twisted Romance first came out, and life happens, and writing books actually takes a lot of time. So you don't have time to write a new story every week, unless you want to sleep. I mean, yeah, I like sleeping, so short stories kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. What was the question? Oh yeah, sorry. Got excited about sleeping. Yeah, so having people be able to respond to stuff as I was writing and releasing stories and sort of feeling out the world, seeing like what worked for people and what didn't, and what I didn't develop enough, or what I kind of left open or a little too ambiguous. I like a certain level of ambiguity. So it was really good. It was really positive. Everyone I've interacted with who's been a fan of the book, or the stories and the original short story and Twisted Romance, and then now the book, has been super kind and thoughtful. On the Discord that I'd set up for my Patreon, like, you know, we would have conversations about the book, the book in progress at the time, but like the themes and the characters, and especially like what it means to tell stories about a romance story, let's say, about characters who are working poor, as opposed to like the sort of very common aspirational tropes of like marrying up or marrying into royalty, and, you know, like what, like, you know, things being what they are. I find that it was really rewarding to write and have access to feedback from people who were like heartened by the sort of stories that I was telling and wanting to tell, and again, like getting that feedback was really good. And then having like a tiny little army of people who support the book on release has been super helpful. I don't know if it's like how to describe it in influencing the characters necessarily, because all the responses have been very kind. And I don't know, I mean, if anyone had feedback, it was always like very positive. Let's trying to think, like trying to like arrange my thoughts. Yeah, it was never like, oh, you can't do. Yeah, I think a lot of people mistake feedback as being like negative or critical, and even if it is critical, like, you know, we're all adults and we're going to talk about it. No one's going to get her feelings hurt. So yeah, like having people like be honest and genuine about like what worked. Yeah, having people respond to it was helpful. I don't know if I'd like walked anything back necessarily. I think it just sort of like having feedback and having comments and these discussions, especially like on Twitter or like on Discord, story being so much about like, you know, cycles of poverty and, you know, overcoming, you know, abandonment, you know, because a lot of people are driven to do very sad and unsavory things in their own families as a response to their, you know, their circumstances and their upbringings. And, you know, he's a product of that, but his family was also a product of that. And then their parents or grandparents were products of that too. So, you know, having people respond sort of in real time to the sort of things that I was like trying to put out there has been super helpful, and has helped me iron out, I think, or at least be a little more clear and coherent about how I want to tell those sorts of stories. So I would say that having a fan base prior to the book coming out and basically during the entire development process of the book has been super helpful. And I mean, I make it sound like they're all editors helping me, but I mean, like, yeah, they're kind of like beta readers, you know, because they read all the short stories, and all those short stories were adapted and rolled into the novel. You know, the original short story, Leather and Lace, which is where the book title comes from, you know, it was adapted and expanded upon. But like I said before, all of those little, not all of them, but a lot of those little short stories that I wrote that people really, really responded well to, ended up reworked and retooled and put into the novel. So, you know, like, they were kind of like having a little army of beta readers, you know, who tell me if something was working or if something wasn't, you know, being talked about enough or had enough nuance or anything like that. So yeah, I would say it's a really good positive experience that I don't think a lot of writers necessarily have access to, because you might not have a little Discord and a private little space to talk about stuff. You might not have, other times you don't necessarily get reader feedback until way after the book comes out. And then, you may have beta readers and you may have friends who are writers or friends who are editors who help you develop things. But unless you have people who are really telling you as a reader what they enjoy about your work, sometimes you just don't know. So I think it's not only been productive. I think I'm actually really after hearing myself say all these things for 20 minutes, I think it's been a privilege, to have a small group of readers who, not small, there were several hundred people who followed my Patreon. a considerable number of respectable people who have supported my work over the years. So I think that was a net good and a privilege, I would say. So thanks for the question. Trying to take so long and finding a new question here. Oh no. Sorry for the downtime. Try not to fill this with dead air, I promise. I'm not going to sing a song. I can't sing. I have a face for radio as it is. I'm not going to embarrass myself further. All right. Can you tell us a secret about Cash and a secret about Dorian? All right. So a secret about Cash. That's interesting. In his life or from the reader? His whole, because his entire fascination, obsession, standship of Stevie Nicks is a secret to everyone in his entire family, and something that he keeps to himself from most people, because the few times that he attempted to share the fact that he, his love of Stevie Nicks and his, singular hobby of singing Stevie Nicks songs at karaoke, that's something the few times that he attempted to share that with other people, it ended terribly, and he was horribly embarrassed. So that's a pretty big secret that he keeps to himself. Obviously, it's not a secret to the reader because the reader knows all this. When we're first introduced, we see it from Dorian's perspective, and it's very oh, he's singing in the neon lights and whatever. So it's very romantically portrayed in the book. I think. As far as a secret that the reader doesn't know, you probably don't know that he has several ill-advised tattoos. They both have many ill-advised tattoos. Cash's most ill-advised tattoo was the name of this is a lot of spoilers. The name of, let's say, a character you don't know yet, a fiancé from his previous escapades. He had tattooed on his chest very prominently, and then when that very ill-advised relationship blew up in his face, obviously, because Cash has two speeds, he's either all in on a relationship or so. When it blew up in his face, he had to have it removed and then covered up with another ill-advised tattoo. So that's a secret about Cash that you probably don't know. And as a secret about Dorian, J.M. Barrett says cruising werewolf bars. Yes, that's his other. Cash spends a lot of time hanging out at werewolf. Don't bring this up. So I've been sworn to secrecy. So yeah, those are two secrets. Oh well, no, they're secrets for both of them. Let's see. So thank you for that, and hopefully that I don't get shot over over airing Dorian's dirty laundry. Can you share something about the book that isn't in the blurb? 3. And there is a slow dance scene at a bar that is owned and patronized by Werdeer. So that happened. And then Dominique has many costume changes throughout the book. Yeah, the whole gimmick about Dominique is that she wears knockoff designer dog sweaters all the time and dresses better than either Dorian or Cash. And yeah, I tried to fit in as many costume changes as possible for her. You might consider that an arc of some kind, if you will. But I don't remember how many different sweaters she wears, but I try to highlight that in every scene where it's like, well, this is the sweater she's wearing. Because she dressed, like, Dorian goes out of his way to make sure that the dog dresses better than him and is always fashionable. So I'll answer one more question from my phone. If anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat because I'm probably going to shift to reading the book very soon. So if you have any questions, please drop them. I'm going to go ahead and answer one more question from here. As soon as I find it. Okay. All right, I think this is a pretty good one. And I think a good finisher, closer, secret closer. How did you find it to create such a rich world for the characters to live in? Like I said, I wrote 40 stories, just going over, you know, all of their the sort of like broader world. I wrote a little. I wrote several little, like, how would you even describe it? Sorry, my dog's in the, that's Cecil in the background. I could just see him on the couch. It distracted me. Little, like, bestiaries of, like, monster species, but, you know, that's fine. It's fine. I find the process of, like, building the world super interesting because, like, I only sort of, like, in the original short story that I wrote, like I said, 2017, like, I just sort of hinted at what I thought would be the general shape of things, and some of those ideas stayed, some of them have sort of, like, fallen off. I find the process of, like, world building to be super interesting and rewarding, like, in its own way. Separate from, you know, writing character arcs and working on character stuff. Sorry, I'm very, like, animated and I keep bumping this thing. So sorry if I've made anyone nauseous. Melissa said Cecil asked to be seen, so yes, I dropped him in. Yes, well, thank you for showing my beautiful man to the masses. It's a fun process, especially since, you know, I gave myself such a loose outline of ideas in that first story and then wrote far too many and then a few too many, like, blog posts and, like, bestiaries and bestiaries. I've only seen that word written. I've never heard it out loud, so don't laugh at me. So yeah, I gave myself so little to work with that when I actually sat down to work on it, I expanded on everything so much, which was super fun. And like I said, rewarding in its own way. It's different from character writing. And then there was also sort of the fun of taking two characters and figuring out who they are and then sort of retro engineering the world from them. So, you know, it's like, okay, this is the kind of person Dorian is. Okay, well, what circumstances could create a Dorian? You know, this poor, smart-mouthed, generally very underwhelming vampire who has anxiety and has an emotional support chihuahua who he dresses better than he will ever dress and has all these, like, trust issues, but he's a very good person and, you know, is personable and cares about people and tries to do the right thing Even though, if you like looked at his background, you'd be like, well, he doesn't have any reason to trust people. He doesn't have any reason to be kind. But, he is and wants to be, despite the things that have happened to him. And maybe because of the things that happened to him, he cares a lot because people didn't care about him. And, same thing could be said about Cash. Like, Cash is a monster hunter, his family comes, he's like Mexican American. Okay. Like his family comes from Mexico, and okay, what propelled monster hunting in Mexico? What was that like? What's the rest of his family like? Why are they the way they are? And then it's sort of like, okay, so, if you have a guy like Cash, who's very like emotional and earnest, it's like, okay, how you'd think he would be sort of cruel and hardened by the world because this is such a ugly, like thankless job, because it's like, why would anyone thank a hunter, because it's not good. It's not it's not a good job. The circumstances that necessitate hunters in the world are not good or just, so you don't expect him to be a kind person and to be an earnest person who feels things very strongly, and then that propels him to act sometimes to his own detriment, So why is he like that? Why does he love karaoke? Why does he love Stevie Nicks? Okay, what is he compensating for in his own life? And what is the life of a hunter like? So taking all those questions and then like building backwards, like I said before, retro engineering a world is like just a really fun like intellectual exercise, in how to, and I don't like asking myself how, okay, these characters were written this way because Lola would be funny, but then it's like, no, I have to actually justify this. So, yes, Dorian is smarmy and smart mouth and funny, but then it's so funny that Cash like loves karaoke. He's a monster hunter. He should like punching things and poker and drinking. It's like, well, no, but then I did all these things and I have to justify them. And then I try to build a world that justifies who they are and why they are the way they are, and justifies their families. Justify. There's a lot of people do a lot of things in this world that are not justifiable, but as long as the logic makes sense is what I'm saying. Trying to build a world that makes enough sense, because a lot of this is super loose. You're following two monster hunters who like hanging out at karaoke bars after work, and they're, have this bickery, sort of relationship where they're best friends and they're roommates, and then they have this, then eventually, because it's a friends to lover story, they have this relationship and fall in love, and then it follows the rest of their lives together. Not the rest of their lives. This is a 6 feet under. Like, let's not go crazy. Like, I love sleep. I can't follow them for the rest of their lives. So, yeah, I went way off tangent there, but it is a very interesting intellectual exercise, and makes me aware of my decisions and makes me justify them, within the world of the story. So the process has been very long and very intense. Probably, like I said before, I probably wrote way more than I needed to, but yeah, I think it's ultimately world building is very rewarding, and building the world has been very rewarding, and yeah, figuring out who all of these people are in this larger, weirder world that they have no control over and are just sort of subject to while they float through their lives, killing monsters and hanging out at karaoke bars, So thank you for the questions. If no one else has anything they want to add in the chat, I will start reading. I actually used to hate public speaking. I took a whole class in college, and it was the worst experience of my life. And then stuff like this was like absolutely terrifying for years. But a couple years ago, I actually used to have a comic book podcast, very short-lived but interesting. And that sort of got me out of my head a little bit. And also recently at my job, I'm now responsible for a weekly company-wide presentation where I have to like actually present things about the world of marketing. So I had to get over this very fast. I initially almost completely kiboshed the idea of having like a live stream or like Zoom launch party, because I was like, oh God, I'm just going to be so nervous. But then like my boss's boss was like, hello, would you like to give a presentation to everyone you know every single week? And I'm like, no. But yeah, so I've gotten over it, and I actually thought this would terrify me, but it hasn't. So thank you all for being patient and staying with me on this while my little device warms up. So yep, no more questions. No one has anything else to say. Okay. So I will probably read the first 2 chapters, and I will begin with chapter 1. And then feel free to leave any comments in the chat. I will respond. I promise. Don't be scared. You know, I will respond. Carl Dreschner wanted to scream as he ran for his life from the charging beast, but he knew that there was no use in it. No one was around to hear him as he raced down the widening footpaths of Robert P. Chastain Park. This late at night, the Devereaux Police Department squad car that lingered in the parking lot to chase off loitering teenagers was already gone. The lamps that dotted the footpaths didn't stay on past closing once the groundskeepers left, casting the entire park in deep pools of shadow. Around him, some shrubs and trees made it hard to see where he was going, tripping as he went or snagged by branches. Above Carl, there was moonlight. Behind him, the sound of hooves beating the dirt. The trees shook as the creature ran between them, following Carl's frantic breathing. He didn't get a good look at the excuse me. He didn't get a good look at it when it appeared outside the Werner family packing plant. It was standing in the farthest corner of the parking lot that faced northeast Pascal Boulevard. Carl had just left his shift for the night when he saw it stand up from a crouch onto 2 legs. All Carl knew was that moonlight bathed its shaggy fur and head of antlers in what looked like silver ribbons. Then the creature charged at him. Carl ran and never looked back. The sound of a thick branch snapping caught Carl by his frayed nerves. He turned to look behind him as a massive silhouette barreled down the footpath. Carl didn't turn in time to see the creature in front of him emerge from the brush. Their bodies connected in the sudden violent impact of a soft human hitting a slab of dense muscle and fur. Carl stumbled back and hit the sidewalk, his head spinning and lungs burning for oxygen. He blinked, and when his vision cleared, he saw it. Carl stumbled back and hit the sidewalk, his head spinning and lungs burning for oxygen. He blinked, and when his vision cleared, he saw it. With the body of a muscle-bound human and a deer's narrow, black-eyed face. It towered overhead and tore into his chest, peeling back the skin and bone to take his heart. Holding the organ up in a meaty paw, the creature licked its mouth with a long black tongue. Carl's body left to the dirt. The stags, one large, one short, underwent their transformation back into their human forms. Their antlers receded into round human skulls, their dense speckled fur shed to reveal their vulnerable skin underneath. The men the stags hid inside of stood naked and bloody under the moonlight. They were middle-aged men with gray hairs at their temples and in their mustaches, crow's feet gathered in the corners of their eyes. One was tall, black, and sturdily built, the other short, white, and round. Just his heart? Asked the taller of the 2 men. His name was Paul W. Garrett. Flecks of muscle and bone clung to his coarse-grayed hair, where his antlers had receded into his skull. He swallowed, feeling queasy. No, the shorter and rounder of the 2 men, named Matthew Lane, smirked under his mustache. I want all of it. Tonight the weredeer feasted. The funny thing is that Carl Dreschner was actually a character who was supposed to be in the sequel of my first novel, which came out many, many years ago. I'm going to say 2013. And I never got around to finishing it. I mean, I finished it, but I never got around to like doing anything with it. And the character, like, I was so tired of the character that I literally gave him to other people. They're like, I like him. I'm like, take him. I don't care. You can rip him off, change his name or whatever. So that's why I decided to actually kill him in the first chapter, just to be like, you are done from my life. I never have to think of you again. So an interesting bit of, information. Chapter 2. In the 8 months since leaving the vampire slums of Devil's Row, Dorian Villeneuve learned many things about the world of humans. He learned even more about the world of monster hunting. Today, he learned that Mothman could fly at speeds of upwards of 60 miles per hour if given enough of a head start. He also learned that it was exceedingly difficult to aim a handgun at Mothman flying upwards of 60 miles per hour. This was especially difficult when hanging out of the window of the rickety pickup truck currently racing down the empty highway by night's cover. "I can't aim for shit," Dorian loudly complained over the wind. "We're going too fast." "Well, we can't exactly slow down," answered Cash Leroy from behind the steering wheel. Dorian's partner held the wheel tightly, standing on the gas pedal and pushing the old truck's engine to keep pace. "Took us long enough to figure out where he was headed." Dorian peered up through the windshield at the Mothman above them. The winged shifter flew against the moon's pale light, high above the tree line of the piney forest edging the highway. At such a height, the Mothman was little more than a broad black shadow. Wings. Furry black hairs covered his whole body in a million points, each catching the moonlight but betraying nothing of the monster's true shape underneath. 2 glowing red eyes bobbled like embers in the dark to give away his line of sight. Glancing down, the Mothman met Dorian's gaze. The vampire bared fangs. Glancing down, the Mothman met Dorian's gaze. The vampire bared fangs. Ahead of the Mothman and his pursuers lay the city of Devereaux and its 300,000 people and monsters. The Mothman, like the other shapeshifters he was kin with, would disappear behind the safety of their human hides there. In the woods where he hunted human hitchhikers and backpackers, the Mothman had the advantage of speed and strength. Even so, the shifter couldn't keep going on forever on tired wings and an empty belly. All 3 of them knew the hunt had to end here, one way or another. Dorian lined up his shot with the Mothman's head and pulled the trigger twice, hoping to hit something vital. His bullets missed by a mile. He let out a hiss and dropped back into the passenger seat. He just hisses constantly. I'm sorry if I'm spoiling anything. He hisses constantly. "This is useless. All right, we need to try something else. Come here." Passenger seat. He just hisses constantly. I'm sorry if I'm spoiling anything. He hisses constantly. "This is useless. All right, we need to try something else. Come here." That was too fast. Sawed-off shotgun he kept in the back of the cab. "Take the wheel for me." Dorian blanched. "What? No, fuck that." 2 inches of him held on tight as Dorian grabbed the wheel. The vampire took a deep breath and tried to calm his shake, its chassis vibrating with every bump or crack in the asphalt. He stomped down the gas pedal. The speedometer galloped ahead with a terrifying roar of the truck's struggling engine. "This is so stupid," Dorian shouted through the window. "You sound surprised," Cash shouted back. From the truck's roof, the hunter made his way to the bed and carefully dropped down. Cash looked up at the Mothman above and took up his shotgun to aim. Even at this speed, he was an excellent marksman. Excuse me. Quickly finding the Mothman's core between the beats of the giant furred wings. The Mothman met his eye just as Cash fired. He changed direction without warning, gliding toward the road to avoid the deer slug trained on his heart. With a curse, Cash reloaded a fresh shell. Neither he nor Dorian saw the Mothman dive down until it was too late. Clawed feet clamped down onto the truck's cab in a heavy thud. The Mothman towered over Cash in a rounded mass, shaped like a squat moth and covered in lush black fur. His shoulders were hunched where bulbous red eyes sat, wings spanning to encircle both the shifter and his prey. Dorian flinched at the sudden noise above, swerving before he could catch himself. Cash fell back into the truck bed as the vampire jerked the wheel to correct. "Cash!" Dorian cried. "Are you okay?" I just imagine him with this very nasally accent, and it's hard to do. Another thud rattled the cab. The Mothman dropped into the truck bed with Cash. A meaty clawed appendage swung out to knock the gun from the hunter's hand. The rifle skittered across the truck bed and fell out into the road. Cash cursed again as the Mothman pressed a heavy foot down into his chest, talons ripping open his shirt. Buttons popped and plaid fabric shredded. Above him, the creature's wings twitched with a low, throaty noise. "Not exactly," the hunter yelled back. Dorian glanced in the rearview mirror. Sorry, Jay and Brett identify so strongly with Dorian's vehement aversion to driving. So, yeah. Relatable. Dorian glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw nothing but outstretched wings, black and patterned with white dappling that held the shape of human skulls when the vampire blinked. A bright bolt of fear brought his foot down on the brakes. The truck lurched forward with an aching squeal. Busy with his prey, the Mothman couldn't keep his balance as the truck screeched to a halt. The monster tumbled back over the cab and down into the truck's hood, landing in the road. The Mothman didn't move. In the driver's seat, Dorian sucked down his shaking breath. He stood on the gas pedal. The truck roared back to life, tires skidding as it barreled ahead at the Mothman. With a sickening crack, the Mothman went under the tires. Once satisfied he was dead, Dorian stopped the truck. Cash appeared in the rearview mirror. He sat up to look at what remained of his shirt, then at the Mothman in the truck's back tires. The shirt, like the Mothman, was a goner. Opening up the small hatch window, he regarded the vampire with a fond look. "Hey, thanks for saving my ass," Cash said. "Thought I was going to have to lose a nipple when the shirt went." Scoffing, Dorian bared fangs. "If you didn't shimmy out into the truck to fight him, I wouldn't have had to save your ass in the first place." "The plan worked, didn't it?" "The plan was still hanging your ass off of a moving truck." "Well, the past is the past." With a smile, Cash canted his head. "So thanks." The vampire's face felt warm. It was quiet now. All he could hear was his own leaping pulse. Before Dorian could say anything, the Mothman jerked under the chassis. The monster let out a predatory rattle, with what remained of a broken maw. Cash flinched as an injured appendage reached up to grab the truck's tailgate for leverage. Without a second thought, Dorian looked at the gear shift and began jerking on it wildly, forcing the truck into reverse. He pressed the gas pedal once more. The truck backed into the Mothman and pulled him under the wheels. As the truck screeched to a halt, Dorian and Cash stopped. Dorian and Cash watched the Mothman's body for signs of life. This time, the monster stayed dead. Letting out a breath, Dorian clapped. Clunking noises were nothing new, but the sound... The vampire couldn't stifle his whimper.
I think it's just been kind of like shaky. I'm sure it's our internet.
Yeah, I think it is the internet. Let's see.
I see you now.
Okay.
I stopped watching that way I wasn't sitting on the...
Girlfriend sitting here trying to see if they can see the stream.
I don't know if she's typing, but I don't know if anything's... It's not loading for me.
Yeah. Yes, this is the joys of put on music, but I'm afraid of like copyright claims, so
Yeah, I have no...
I'd put like loading music on until we sort this out. But
it's I'm trying here, babe.
No, I know.
I don't think there's anything that we can do because it's just not... It's stuck on loading and nobody's... My mom's not here responding.
Yeah, okay.
I just was shrugging.
Buffering for a little bit. Can anyone see me? You can type in the thing. If you can't, I'm taking silence as it's
And then it just freezes. So
Oh. All right. I wouldn't call this. I might have to just call this quits. Unfortunately, and maybe just like schedule like a little reading or something, like maybe next week, like a weekday evening when maybe internet acts like because I 1000 Dungeon for Comcast, or 1000 Years Dungeon, I'm sorry, for Comcast. But thank you. I had a great time. Hopefully I'll see you again soon with any luck. And have a great weekend.